They said no woman west of the Mississippi could stand the sight of Koa Blackhawk. Some claimed his eyes were born from lightning. Others whispered he carried the ghosts of everyone who'd ever dared challenge him. Mothers in dusty frontier towns told their children that if they didn't behave, Blackhawk would appear out of the night, silent as a mountain cat. Men feared his shadow. Women feared his temper. And Koa preferred it that way. For years he rode alone across the Arizona Territory, a figure both hated and respected, surviving every ambush, every bounty hunter, every soldier sent after him. But pride is a fragile shield, and even legends can bleed. The sun was sinking when everything changed. A band of outlaw raiders, men even more merciless than the ones who chased Koa, caught him by surprise near the dry bed of the Gila River. They wanted his horse, his weapons, and the bounty on his head. Koa fought like a cornered wolf, dropping two before the third's bullet tore into his ribs. He staggered backward, dirt kicking under his boots, breath burning like swallowed fire. The last thing he saw before the world blurred was his horse bolting into the desert and the raiders riding away. Thinking the great Apache warrior would die before sunrise, for the first time in years, Koa Blackhawk lay helpless. The wind carried the scent of creosote and dust. Coyotes yipped in the distance. Pain pulsed through him in waves so sharp they nearly cut his thoughts apart. He tried to crawl toward the shade of a lone mesquite tree, but his strength snapped like a dry twig. He closed his eyes, ready to let the desert take him, but fate had a different path. Hours later, he didn't know how many hooves approached. Koa gripped the earth, instinct ready to fight even if he couldn't lift a hand. A blurry figure dismounted, and a woman's voice cut through the haze. "Oh, Lord!" "Sir, can you hear me?" Koa had never heard a voice like that, soft but steady, frightened yet fearless. He forced his eyes open and saw her leaning over him. Abigail Hart, though he didn't know her name yet. Her dress was plain, dusty from travel. Her auburn hair had fallen loose from its pins. She wore a satchel marked with a red cross, the unmistakable sign of a nurse. But what struck him most was the look in her eyes. Not disgust. Not fear. Not the quick judgment most offered him. Compassion. "You're losing blood fast," she whispered, brushing grit from the bullet wound. "If I don't clean this, infection will take you before the night does." Koa snarled, forcing the words out through clenched teeth. "Leave me." Abigail hesitated, but only for a heartbeat. No, no. Every woman he'd ever encountered ran the moment he glared. But this one, this small, determined nurse, acted like he was just another patient on her table. She tore open her water canteen, soaking a cloth. When she touched the wound, Koa growled low like a wounded animal. Abigail flinched, but her hands didn't stop. "I know it hurts," she said, her voice barely shaking. "But you're not dying out here." "Not today." Koa studied her through half-lidded eyes. She was trembling slightly, but it wasn't from him. He recognized that kind of shake. Exhaustion, hunger, maybe fear of something that wasn't him. "Why?" He rasped. "Why save me?" Abigail swallowed hard, pressing the cloth deeper to stop the bleeding. "Because I'm a nurse. Because you're hurt. And because I can't walk away from someone who needs help, even if they don't want it." Her honesty disarmed him more than any bullet. As the desert cooled and stars crept overhead, Abigail worked in silence. She cleaned the wound with practiced hands. She stitched torn flesh with the precision of a woman who had spent too many nights battling death. And every so often, she murmured something soft, encouragement, prayer, maybe just breath to fill the lonely night. Koa felt consciousness slipping, but he kept his gaze on her. There was strength in this woman, quiet, stubborn, unexpected. A woman who didn't fear him. A woman who didn't run. By the time she finished, The Apache warrior who terrified half the territory realized something he never expected. For the first time in his life, a woman had saved him. And she hadn't even asked his name. Abigail Hart had treated wounded soldiers, sick children, miners crushed under fallen earth, and ranchers torn open by barbed wire. She had seen fear in every shape it came in. But nothing, not even the battlefield tents she once worked in, prepared her for nursing Koa Blackhawk, the most feared Apache warrior in the territory. At sunrise, after a night of tending him under the mesquite's thin shade, she realized he was finally conscious enough to truly see her. His dark eyes narrowed, sharp as obsidian knives, tracking every movement she made. "You shouldn't be here," he growled. His voice was low. Dangerous, the kind that would send most women scrambling behind a locked door. Abigail simply reached into her satchel and pulled out more bandages. "You're still bleeding," she said, matter of fact. "And unless you want to die with your reputation, you'll let me help you." Koa tried to sit up, but pain lanced through his ribs and forced him back. He clenched his jaw, refusing to show weakness, but Abigail saw it anyway. She'd been a nurse too long to miss the way his breath hitched, the way he pressed a hand to his side. When she reached for him, he jerked away like an untamed horse. "Don't touch me." Abigail paused, studying him. Not with fear, not with awe, just quiet observation. "Why not?" Koa blinked as if the question was absurd. "Because you're afraid." "No," she said softly, shaking her head. "I'm tired. And you're making this harder than it needs to be." No one had spoken to him like that in years, maybe ever. Abigail leaned in again, and this time Koa didn't stop her. He watched her work, confusion flickering beneath the hard mask he wore. She cleaned the wound carefully, brushing away dust and dried blood with the gentleness of a mother tending a child. Every touch was steady, controlled, and every touch confused him. Women didn't get close to him. They fled from him, hid their children, crossed the street when he rode through a town. They looked at him like he was a storm waiting to break. But this nurse? This small, weary woman with shadows in her eyes? She treated him like a man. Not a monster. Not a legend. Not a threat. Just a man. Koa's voice came out rough, suspicious. "You're not scared of me?" Abigail glanced up. "Should I be?" He didn't answer. He wasn't sure he even knew anymore. The desert morning stretched quiet around them. The only sounds the rustling brush and Abigail's steady breathing as she rebandaged his side. She moved with practiced calm, though her hands trembled slightly, an exhaustion-born tremble, not fear. "You look half dead yourself," he muttered. She exhaled a faint laugh. "I've been traveling for 4 days. No proper sleep. No proper meals. But I'll be fine." Koa frowned. Why travel alone? A woman wandering the desert. It's dangerous. The irony didn't escape her. Says the man who nearly bled out under a tree. His jaw tightened, but a faint spark of humor or respect flashed briefly in his eyes. When she finished, Abigail sat back on her heels. "You'll live, but you won't be walking far for a while." Koa tested his strength again, trying to rise. A sharp cry of pain broke from him before he caught it, teeth clenched. Abigail lunged forward, steadying his shoulder before he fell. He froze. Her hand was on him, warm, gentle, firm. He stared at her fingers against his skin as if no one had touched him with tenderness in years, because no one had. Abigail withdrew slowly, her breath hitching as if she too felt the moment stretch between them. But she cleared her throat and said briskly, "You need rest, not pride." Pride was all he'd ever had. But lying there, staring up at her, he felt something unfamiliar knot in his chest. Not anger. Not suspicion. Something softer. He pushed it away. "You should go," he said again, though this time it lacked the bite. "Your people will worry." Abigail stiffened. Something in her expression changed, something wounded, private. "I have no people," she whispered. Koa didn't expect the ache that struck him at those words. She turned away quickly, as if she hadn't meant to reveal anything, and began packing her satchel. For the first time, he realized the truth. He wasn't the only one running from ghosts. Before he could think, he said, "Stay, not because I need you, but because the desert is worse than I am." Abigail looked at him, searching his face, and for the first time in his life, a woman didn't just refuse to run, she chose to stay. Abigail Hart had always been good at hiding her past. A nurse learns early how to keep her face calm while someone bleeds out in front of her. How to speak softly even when her heart is beating too fast. How to swallow fear until her voice steadies again. These skills served her well in the Arizona Territory, but sitting beside the feared Apache warrior, she felt her own lies tightening around her throat. Koa Blackhawk slept restlessly beneath the thin shade of the mesquite tree. Abigail had forced him to drink water, convinced him to eat a few bites of hardtack, and moved him out of the worst heat. Now his breathing was slow and uneven, his body fighting the fever that threatened to swallow him whole. While he slept, Abigail finally allowed herself to sag against the trunk, exhaustion breaking through her practiced strength. She raked a hand through her hair, closing her eyes. 4 days, she whispered to herself. 4 days running, and somehow I find him. The irony wasn't lost on her. The one man feared by soldiers, settlers, and outlaws alike, and she had all but stumbled over him in the desert, but perhaps it wasn't luck. Perhaps fate had simply run out of patience with her. Abigail hadn't always been a wanderer. She once belonged to a world of front porches, Sunday dresses, and a father who believed he could choose her future like selecting a horse from a stable. Her father's choice had been Dr. Edmund Price, esteemed, wealthy, respected by the entire town, but when the doors closed, Edmund Price was a man who believed a wife should bend, break, and obey. The first time he gripped her wrist hard enough to leave bruises, he apologized. The second time, he blamed her. The third time, he called it discipline. The fourth time, she ran, not because of what he did to her, but because she feared what he might do next. She fled with her nurse's satchel and the clothes on her back, slipping out before dawn, her heart pounding like a trapped animal. She didn't look behind her, not even when she heard her father shouting her name. If they found her, she knew exactly what would happen. The engagement would stand, and her life would no longer be hers. So she ran, and she kept running, until her path crossed Koa Blackhawk's. Abigail opened her eyes and looked at him now. His skin glistened with fever, his dark hair clinging to his forehead. He was formidable even in sleep-broad shoulders, a body shaped by battle and long miles on horseback. The deep scars across his chest told enough stories to fill a book, and yet, in this moment, he didn't look frightening. He looked human. He looked wounded. He looked like someone who hadn't known gentleness in a very long time. Abigail reached out, brushing away the sweat beating at his temple. His skin was burning. She bit her lip. "Please don't die," she whispered, though she didn't know why the thought frightened her so much. Suddenly, his fingers clamped around her wrist fast, strong, startling. Abigail gasped. His eyes snapped open, wild and disoriented. "Who?" His voice cracked. "Where?" "Easy," she murmured, covering his hand with her free one. "It's me, Abigail. You're safe." He blinked, confusion slowly giving way to recognition. His grip loosened, but he didn't release her entirely. "You stayed," he rasped. "I said I would. You shouldn't have." She sighed, her shoulders slumping. "I know." Koa studied her with an intensity that made her spine warm. "You hide something." Abigail stiffened. Few people ever noticed. Even fewer dared push the subject. You hide your fear, he murmured, his voice lowering. Not fear of me. Fear of something else. Someone else. Her heartbeat stuttered. Koa's gaze sharpened. Who hunts you? She pulled her hand free, rising quickly to her feet. You need rest. The fever is making you imagine things. You lie, he said simply. She turned away, swallowing hard. Everyone lies about something. He let the words hang in the dry desert air. Heavy as thunderclouds. After a long silence, he spoke again, quieter, gentler than she expected. You saved my life, he said. I don't forget such things. Abigail's throat tightened. Gratitude shouldn't have frightened her, but it did. She had not expected warmth from the man feared across the territory. She hadn't expected understanding, and certainly not the subtle pull she felt toward him. She knelt beside him again, checking his pulse, pretending her hands weren't shaking. Koa watched her with eyes that saw too much and judged nothing. For the first time since she fled her old life, Abigail realized a truth. She wasn't the only one haunted by demons. She wasn't the only one learning how to trust again, and in that quiet desert morning, kneeling beside a warrior she was supposed to fear, Abigail Hart discovered something she never expected. Saving his life felt strangely like saving her own. The sun had climbed higher than it should have in the Arizona sky, turning the desert into a furnace. Koa Blackhawk stirred beneath the mesquite, sweat glistening on his skin, fever racking his body. Abigail Hart hovered nearby, her hands steady as ever, though her heart threatened to race out of her chest every time he moaned or shifted in discomfort. For days, she had nursed him with nothing but water, hardtack, and the makeshift remedies she carried in her satchel. She had cleaned wounds, stitched torn flesh, and whispered to him through the nights while coyotes sang in the distance. And all the while she had endured his snarls, his growls, and his attempts to push her away. But the fever changed something. By the third night, the world seemed to twist around Koa's consciousness. Dreams blurred into waking, and waking blurred into dreams. Abigail's face hovered above him in a haze, soft, glowing in the firelight, the edges of her hair catching the orange flicker like a halo. You're burning, she whispered again, pressing a cool cloth to his brow. Her fingers lingered longer than necessary, brushing strands of dark hair from his eyes. Try to sleep. I'll be right here. He grunted, half aware of her presence, half aware of the trembling warmth of her hand against his skin. For a warrior used to living alone, used to fearing and hurting anyone who tried to get close, this gentle insistence was disarming. Why? Why do you stay? He rasped, voice thick with fever. No one. No one stays. Abigail looked down at him, pain and patience etched into every line of her face. Because I promised, she said softly. And because someone has to see the man behind the legend. Someone has to see the man who hurts, not the monster they all claim you to be. Koa's eyes flickered open. Feverish clarity brought with it a raw vulnerability he hadn't known he could show. The Apache warrior, feared across the Arizona territory, stared at the nurse and realized he had no defenses left. His legendary walls, the fierce isolation, the temper. The scars crumbled in the face of someone who simply refused to turn away. He tried to speak, tried to push her hands away, tried to reclaim the strength and control he had always relied on. But the words died in his throat. His body shook not only from fever, but from the strange, dizzying sensation of being cared for without judgment. You're not afraid, he murmured. His voice was almost a whisper, lost in the crackle of the fire. No woman. Ever, no one. I'm not afraid of you, Abigail interrupted gently. I see you, Koa, and you're worth seeing. The name lingered in the air like a spell. For years he had been only the Apache warrior, the terror, the legend. Now he heard it spoken with kindness, and it struck him with more force than any arrow, rifle, or knife ever had. He shifted, pain shooting through his ribs, and she moved closer to steady him. Her hands brushed against his chest, tracing over scars that had been carved into him by battles, by betrayals, by the harsh life of a man who had never allowed tenderness. And for the first time, he did not recoil. He did not snarl. Instead, he allowed himself to feel it, the strange, burning warmth of trust, the softness of compassion, the faint stirring of something he had not dared name desire. Abigail worked quietly, humming under her breath as she applied ointments and cleaned his wounds again. Her presence was constant, unwavering, a steady light in the storm of pain and fever. And with every word, every movement, every glance, Koa's walls fell further. By the time the sun rose over the jagged desert horizon, he was still weak, still aching, but something inside him had shifted. The man who had terrified everyone he met, the warrior who had never let anyone close, now looked at the nurse beside him and saw not fear, but understanding. And for the first time in his life, Koa Blackhawk realized that perhaps he didn't have to fight the world alone anymore. Perhaps someone could see the man beneath the legend. Perhaps someone could even love him. Abigail, unaware of the storm she had quietly awakened in him, smiled softly as she adjusted his blanket. "Rest now," she said. "You're going to be all right." For the first time in years, Koa didn't doubt her. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to hope. The days stretched on in the desert, each one hotter than the last. Yet Koa Blackhawk found himself looking forward to the hours Abigail spent beside him. He rode the thin line between irritation and fascination, scowling one moment and silently admiring her the next. For a man who had never let anyone get close, this strange dependence unsettled him in ways no gunfight or ambush ever had. Abigail, for her part, moved with a quiet confidence that belied her fatigue. Every bandage, every stitch, every whispered word was measured, precise. And through it all, she never flinched at his temper. She never recoiled at his scars, his reputation, or the raw intensity in his gaze. Koa, who had once seen fear in every woman's eyes, now saw something he hadn't expected: courage. One evening, as the orange light of the sunset burned across the desert horizon, Koa sat on the edge of the makeshift bed of blankets they had spread under the mesquite tree. He flexed his hands, still sore from the bullets and bruises of the ambush. Abigail knelt in front of him, gently checking a deep gash along his forearm. "You've seen worse," she said softly. "I've seen worse," he admitted. But there was an edge to his voice now less fearsome, less guarded. "But no woman has ever stayed." Abigail froze for a moment, the words settling like a heavy stone between them. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of their meaning. "I'm not most women," she replied. Koa's dark eyes studied her, narrowing as he searched for hidden motives, lies, anything that might betray her. He found none. Only honesty. Only the quiet strength she had carried with her through miles of desert, nights of solitude, and the fear of every man and woman who would try to own her. "You shouldn't have come," he muttered. "If anyone knew you were here, you'd be in danger." Abigail looked up at him, meeting his gaze. "I'm already in danger," she said, "but I've made my choice. I'm not leaving you." He let the words hang in the dry air. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across their small camp. He thought of every woman who had ever run screaming from him, every mother who had warned her daughter, every whisper of fear that had followed him like a cloud. And yet, here was Abigail, sitting on the ground, looking up at him with no fear, no hesitation, no desire to flee. For the first time, Koa felt the raw edge of vulnerability. His chest tightened, his body tense, and yet Paradoxically, he felt a strange sense of relief. Someone had crossed the barrier he had built around himself, not to destroy him, not to manipulate him, but simply to be there. "You have no idea what that means," he said, voice low, almost a growl. "No one has ever," Abigail whispered, placing a gentle finger against his lips. "You don't have to say it." Her touch was deliberate, steady, and the smallest contact sent an unfamiliar warmth through him. Koa had spent his life learning to survive, to fight, to fear, and to push away anyone who might see the man beneath the warrior. But now, sitting there, the desert wind stirring around them, he realized that maybe he didn't have to be alone anymore. "You trust me," Abigail said, almost as a statement to herself as to him. "Even when you shouldn't, even when it's dangerous. You let me stay." Koa's gaze softened, a slow understanding settling in. I don't know how to feel about that," he admitted. "But I know it's different." She smiled, faint and tender, brushing a loose strand of hair from his face. "Sometimes, different is exactly what we need." He studied her for a long moment, noticing the way her eyes glimmered in the fading light, the way her hands moved with calm precision, the strength hidden beneath her gentle exterior. The storm he had carried in his chest for years, the rage, the fear, the isolation seemed to ease. If only a fraction. And as the sun finally slipped below the horizon, painting the desert in deep purples and reds, Koa Blackhawk realized something he had never allowed himself to admit. For the first time, he wanted more than survival. He wanted Abigail. Not just her courage, not just her hands that healed him, not just her willingness to stay. He wanted her heart. And for the first time, he thought that perhaps one unlikely, stubborn, extraordinary woman could finally see the man he was beneath, the fearsome Apache warrior. The desert had a way of making even the fiercest men feel exposed, and Koa Blackhawk was no exception. Weeks had passed since Abigail Hart had nursed him from the brink of death, and though his wounds had begun to heal, the tension in the air was thick with a new threat, one neither of them could ignore. Abigail had known the danger would catch up eventually. She had been running for months, fleeing the wealthy and ruthless Dr. Edmund Price, the man who had once claimed she would be his bride. She had slipped through towns and across plains, relying on her wits, her courage, and a few well-timed bribes. But her past had a long reach, and bounty hunters always followed the scent of someone unwilling to return. That morning, the sound of distant hoofbeats cut through the desert silence. Koa's instincts flared immediately. He pushed himself upright, scanning the horizon with a warrior's precision. Abigail followed his gaze, tension tightening her shoulders. "They're coming," Koa murmured, dark eyes narrowing. Abigail's stomach clenched. She recognized the uniformed soldiers on horseback, U.S. Army troops moving in formation, led by a captain whose reputation for brutality rivaled Koa's own. Behind them, hidden among the dust and scrub, she imagined the bounty hunters sent by her former fiancé, relentless in their pursuit. Her past and his present were converging, threatening to undo the fragile bond that had begun to form between them. "We have to move," Koa said, his voice calm but urgent. "Now," Abigail nodded, gathering her supplies and her courage. She had survived long enough to know that hesitation could mean death. Koa, despite the lingering soreness from his wounds, mounted his horse with the fluid grace of a predator, and she climbed behind him, gripping his waist tightly. The desert stretched endlessly before them, an unforgiving expanse of sand, rock, and sun-baked earth. But Koa knew every hidden pass, every secret canyon, every narrow trail that could give them a chance to escape. Abigail held on as they galloped, dust stinging her eyes, heart pounding not just from exertion but from the adrenaline of survival. As the soldiers closed the distance, Koa's plan unfolded with lethal precision. They ducked into narrow washes, doubled back through rocky defiles, and used every natural cover the desert could offer. Abigail marveled at his skill, his instincts honed from a lifetime of evasion and combat. And yet, in fleeting moments, she saw glimpses of vulnerability, the sharp intake of breath as he felt her hand brush his back. The brief hesitation when a hidden rock could topple them both by midday. They had put significant distance between themselves and the approaching troops, but the threat remained. Abigail, though exhausted, refused to let fear paralyze her. She met Koa's eyes as they paused near a shaded mesa, panting from exertion. "We can't keep running forever," she said. "We need a plan." Koa studied her, his face unreadable, then nodded slowly. "You're right. But we survived tonight. We fight another day. They underestimate us because they think fear is all we have. They're wrong." Her hand brushed his arm, almost instinctively. "I'm not afraid of you," she whispered, echoing words she had spoken in the quiet desert nights. "And I'm not afraid of them either." Koa's eyes softened. He had spent his life trusting no one, relying only on strength, skill, and the harsh lessons of survival. But Abigail's presence challenged everything he believed about companionship, loyalty, and love. She had proven that courage did not always come from weapons or brawn, but from the heart and from the willingness to stay when every instinct screamed to flee. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, Koa led her to a hidden canyon, a narrow passage that would shield them from view and give them a chance to rest. There, in the quiet and shadow, Abigail tended to his remaining bruises, and he taught her how to read the terrain, how to anticipate danger, and how to survive in a world that often showed no mercy. And in those moments, amid the fear of pursuit and the ever-present threat of capture, something deeper grew between them. A bond forged not in comfort, but in the crucible of danger, a connection neither could deny, a promise unspoken but understood. Abigail realized that she wasn't just surviving with Koa Blackhawk. She was learning to trust him with her life. And Koa, for the first time in years, discovered that there was something worth protecting beyond his own survival. They were hunted, yes, but they were also united. And in the unforgiving heart of the desert, that unity was a force neither the army nor her past could easily break. The hidden canyon offered some refuge from the relentless pursuit of the army and bounty hunters, but Koa Blackhawk knew it was only temporary. The desert might hide them for a day, maybe two, but his enemies were relentless. And Abigail Hart, the woman who had refused to flee, who had healed him and who had seen him not as a monster but as a man, was now in mortal danger. Koa's mind was a whirlwind of strategies. But one thought dominated: she would not be taken. Not by soldiers. Not by her past. Not by anyone. He had spent his life relying on strength, on speed, on cunning, but never on someone else. And now, for the first time, he wanted to fight not just for himself, but for her. The realization was strange, grounding, and terrifying all at once. Abigail watched him as he moved with the quiet precision of a predator through the canyon, checking paths, scanning the horizon, adjusting their meager camp. Her respect for him had grown steadily over the past days. She had seen the man behind the legend, the scars he bore, the solitude he carried, and the moments of vulnerability he rarely allowed anyone to witness. "Koa," she said softly, stepping closer. "You can't carry all of this alone." He paused, his gaze sharp, but not angry. "I don't need you to understand," he murmured. "I only need you to trust me." Abigail nodded, though her heart clenched. Trust was a fragile thing, and yet she had given it to him, perhaps more than she realized. She reached out, brushing her fingers along his forearm in reassurance. The gesture was small, but Koa felt it in his bones, a tether, a connection that grounded him in the chaos of their lives. "Then trust me," he said finally, voice low and steady. "I will not let anyone take you. You hear me? Not your past. Not the army. Not anyone." Her eyes widened slightly at the intensity of his vow. For a man who had been feared across the territory, who had survived countless battles and betrayals, the declaration was profound. It was more than protection. It was a promise of loyalty, of devotion, of unyielding strength. "I believe you," she whispered. Koa allowed himself a brief moment of relief before scanning the canyon again. They couldn't linger. The soldiers were clever, and he had learned to expect the unexpected. He led her deeper into a series of narrow passages and hidden alcoves that twisted like a natural labyrinth. Every step, every turn was calculated to throw their pursuers off their trail. During a short pause, Abigail studied him quietly. She had seen countless men in her work, some brave, some broken, but Koa Blackhawk was unlike any other. He was fierce yet careful, intimidating yet gentle with her, a contradiction she couldn't ignore. The man who could strike terror across miles of desert had allowed her to enter his world, and she felt honored and terrified. "Koa," she said softly, "why do you care so much about me?" He turned, his eyes dark and unreadable, yet softened by something she could not name. "Because you stayed," he replied simply. "Because no one else has. Because, for the first time in my life, I feel something I never thought I would." Abigail's heart skipped a beat. The words hung between them, unspoken yet powerful. They did not need to be defined. Action and intent were stronger than any declaration. As night fell, the canyon's shadows stretched long, and Koa built a small fire to keep watch. He instructed Abigail to rest, and she obeyed, though part of her wished to stay alert by his side. He kept a vigilant watch, every sense alert, knowing that danger could appear at any moment. But even as he prepared for the threats outside, he found himself thinking of her not as a burden, not as a responsibility, but as someone who had become essential to his life. By the time the stars blanketed the desert sky, Koa Blackhawk made a silent vow to the night, to the canyon, and to the woman resting near his fire, "You will not be taken, and I will not let anything harm you." And in the quiet, vulnerable moment that followed, both of them realized that their bond had grown stronger, not just from survival, but from the trust, courage, and unspoken love that had bloomed in the heart of the harshest desert west of the Mississippi. The Apache warrior had always been feared, always been alone. But now, with Abigail Hart beside him, he faced the future with something he had never known, a reason to fight beyond himself, a reason to endure beyond survival, and a reason to hope. The desert had been unrelenting, unforgiving, and merciless. But in the quiet aftermath of pursuit and peril, Koa Blackhawk and Abigail Hart finally allowed themselves to breathe. The soldiers had been thrown off their trail by hidden passes, sudden changes of direction, and Koa's unmatched knowledge of the land. Abigail's past, though still a threat on paper, had become powerless in the face of the bond they had forged. For the first time in months, or perhaps years, Abigail felt a sense of peace. She had survived the desert, escaped her former life, and found herself not just beside a man who had once inspired terror, but beside a man who had shown her care, protection, and trust unlike any she had ever known. And Koa, the Apache warrior feared across Arizona territory, had discovered something he had never allowed himself: the warmth of companionship, the comfort of trust, and the stirring of love. They had made camp beneath a sprawling mesquite, the firelight flickering against Koa's strong, scarred features. Abigail sat beside him, hands resting on her knees, watching the shadows dance across the rugged canyon walls. Silence stretched comfortably between them, punctuated only by the soft crackle of the fire and the distant call of a coyote. Koa studied her, his dark eyes softer than they had ever been. You've healed me in ways I didn't think possible, he murmured. Not just my body, but my heart. Abigail's gaze dropped for a moment, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. I never expected to save anyone like you, she whispered. I certainly didn't expect this. Her hand hovered near his, almost instinctively, before settling in her lap. He reached out slowly, deliberately, and placed his hand over hers. The touch was electric, a spark that sent warmth from her fingertips through her whole body. Koa's voice was low, a rough whisper that carried both confession and promise. You're the miracle, Abigail. The one I never knew I needed. Her heart pounded. She had faced death, danger, and betrayal, but nothing had shaken her as much as the intensity in his gaze, the sincerity in his voice. She finally dared to speak the truth she had carried quietly since the day she found him wounded in the desert. Koa, I don't want to go back to a life that doesn't let me choose. A life that tries to own me. I want to be here. With you. His thumb brushed over her knuckles. Then you will be, he said firmly. You'll stay. With me. And I'll protect you, not just from the world, but from anyone who tries to take you from me. The words hung in the cool night air, heavier than any gunshot, fiercer than any desert storm. Abigail leaned in, feeling the heat of his body, the safety of his presence, the undeniable force of the man who had once terrified the territory yet now held her heart as tenderly as he had held her hand. Koa, she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. He cupped her face with one large, calloused hand, brushing her hair back from her forehead. Abigail, you belong to no one but yourself, but I want to belong to you. And in that moment, the desert seemed to fade away, the sand, the rocks, the endless sky. There was only them, a woman who had chosen to stay, a warrior who had chosen to trust, and a love forged in the harshest of lands. Against all odds, they leaned toward each other, the distance shrinking with every heartbeat. When their lips finally met, it was not a clash of fear or desire, but a gentle, deliberate promise. It was a seal on their survival, on their trust, on the bond that neither danger nor past could undo. The Apache warrior and the unlikely nurse held each other close. And in that embrace, they found not just comfort, but home. The fire crackled, sending sparks into the night sky, carrying away the ghosts of the past. Abigail rested her head against Koa's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, a rhythm that had once been lonely and fierce, now softened by love and devotion. In the harsh expanse of the Arizona Territory, where no woman had ever stood by Koa Blackhawk before, the impossible had happened. Against the odds, in the heart of the desert, a miracle had been performed, not through medicine or skill alone, but through courage, trust, and an unwavering willingness to see the man beneath the legend. Abigail whispered softly into the night, "Thank you for letting me stay." Koa held her tighter. "No, thank you for staying. You've saved me more than you'll ever know." And under the endless stars, in a land that had once been unforgiving and wild, two souls who should never have met found each other. The feared Apache warrior and the unlikely nurse had discovered something greater than survival. They had found love.